They thought he was gone. Deployed in Afghanistan, his family's farm was stolen by a homeowners association drunk on power. But what Willowbrook Estates didn't know is that one Army Corps engineer had been waiting 45 years for the perfect moment. And when the spillway gates opened, their empire of luxury drowned in its own arrogance. I stood there, the eviction notice a flimsy insult in my hands, but I didn't utter a single word. Instead, my gaze fell on the ancient yellowed 1923 water rights deed. I just calmly slid across the polished table, a silent, potent threat. In my mind's eye, I watched with grim satisfaction as 35 opulent McMansions transformed into prime lakefront property. Could they really have believed they could steal my Grandpa Joe's cherished farm while I was serving our country in Afghanistan? These self-important bureaucrats, these Karens in their pristine tennis outfits, zipping around in golf carts, had dared to build their perfect suburban fantasy on land they simply took. Oh, but they had no idea who they were dealing with, did they? I'm an Army Corps engineer, and that unassuming earth dam on my land had patiently waited 45 years for someone foolish enough to build directly downstream. Their arrogance was truly breathtaking, wasn't it? But soon the spillway gates would open, and their luxurious development would experience its very first taste of natural, unfiltered Texas flooding. And believe me, that was going to be incredibly satisfying. Where are you watching from right now? You absolutely have to drop a comment below, because you're about to witness the most spectacular HOA takedown you've ever seen. A clash of federal water law and the unstoppable force of gravity. Let me properly introduce myself. I'm Jake Miller, 34 years old, a proud veteran of the Army Corps of Engineers, and the third-generation owner of 47 pristine acres of Texas land, just a stone's throw from Austin. My grandfather, whom everyone affectionately called Grandpa Joe, bought this beautiful property way back in 1955 when Austin was still a sleepy college town, a place where genuine barbecue joints far outnumbered tech companies by 1,000 to 1. Grandpa Joe was a man of the earth, someone who truly believed in nurturing both the land and the people who lived on it. In 1978, he meticulously built that small earth dam on our property. Nothing extravagant, just brilliant practical engineering, designed to collect rainwater for our cattle and, crucially, to lend a helping hand to our downstream neighbors during those brutal dry spells. The Army Corps of Engineers even lent their expertise to its design. Grandpa Joe always used to say that someday those back 40 acres would be worth something truly special, but for now they were simply breathtaking rolling hills where we raised our cattle and where I learned the art of hunting. Then my life took a different turn, with 2 grueling tours in Afghanistan, where I specialized in water management and infrastructure. It's funny, isn't it? Building wells and meticulously managing water flow in a war zone really teaches you the invaluable lesson of how precious clean water truly is, and how quickly people will resort to fighting over it. Tragically, while I was on my second deployment, Grandpa Joe passed away. The property then fell into a trust, managed by my incredibly well-meaning but utterly overwhelmed sister, Emily. She lives all the way out in California, and knows about as much about Texas land law as I know about surfing. She naively hired a local property management company, Lone Star Property Management, to handle the taxes and upkeep. The property taxes were always paid on time, automatically. But here's the crucial mistake: Emily never actually bothered to look at the tax assessment. A huge oversight. And now, allow me to introduce our villain, Brenda Maggie Thornton, 52 years old, the imperious president of Willowbrook Estates HOA, and precisely the kind of woman who drives a gleaming white BMW X7 and considers a tennis outfit appropriate business attire. Maggie possesses that unique brand of passive-aggressive sweetness that Southern women perfect around the age of 45. You know the type, don't you? The kind who will flash you a dazzling smile while subtly twisting the knife in your back, somehow making it sound like they're doing you an immense favor. Maggie is conveniently married to City Councilman Robert Thornton, which, if you're smart, tells you everything you need to know about how she manages to get things done. She's built quite a reputation for her neighborhood beautification initiatives, which is just fancy talk for ruthlessly forcing out anyone who doesn't perfectly conform to her rigid vision of suburban perfection. And no amount of her expensive perfume can quite mask the lingering stench of cigarette smoke and entitlement that seems to follow her around like a dark cloud. I finally came home from my deployment in August of 2023, absolutely yearning to spend some real quality time on Grandpa Joe's land. I drove down that familiar, comforting gravel road, past the ancient oak tree where I'd carved my initials as a boy, fully expecting to see the same serene rolling pastures and that little earth dam sparkling under the Texas sun. Instead, what did I find? Construction crews, colossal concrete trucks, and survey stakes haphazardly scattered across my back 40, like some unwelcome suburban invasion. The crunch of gravel beneath my boots felt utterly different somehow, angrier. I could almost taste the dust in my own rapidly rising fury as I marched directly up to the construction foreman. "Sorry, buddy," he drawled, not looking sorry in the slightest. "We've got all the permits and everything. This is Willowbrook Estates property now. Can you believe the nerve?" I immediately called the police. Officer Davis arrived, explaining with obvious discomfort that the HOA had filed an adverse possession claim while I was overseas. Apparently, when land isn't actively used for a certain period, and if you can prove you've been improving it, you can sometimes claim ownership. It's an archaic law, originally designed to prevent land from sitting idle forever, but it's tragically become a favorite weapon for greedy developers and HOAs looking to aggressively expand their empires. That's when Maggie herself appeared, cruising up in her little golf cart like some kind of suburban warlord. Her voice had that sickeningly syrupy sweetness that instantly made me want to check my wallet. "Your family simply abandoned this land, honey," she purred, smiling as if she were bestowing a great gift upon me. "We're just putting it to good use for the community." But here's what truly made my blood boil. I discovered that her audacious construction crews had brazenly diverted the small creek that fed Grandpa Joe's dam. The water level was visibly dropping every single day, and with it 45 years of careful water management that had faithfully helped our neighbors through countless droughts, floods, and everything in between. As I stood there, helplessly watching the water level recede, Maggie's parting shot echoed menacingly in my ears. "You should have stayed closer to home, soldier boy." In that moment, I knew beyond a shadow of a doubt that this wasn't just about land. This was war. I frantically hired the first attorney I could find. What a colossal mistake. This guy quoted me a staggering $85,000 just to challenge the zoning change. It turns out that while I was bravely serving my country, Maggie's husband, Robert, had shamelessly pushed through an emergency zoning modification. My family's precious land went from agricultural pre-validation to a residential development zone faster than you could say conflict of interest. But here's where my Army Corps training truly came in handy. While that overpriced lawyer was lazily shuffling papers and shamelessly billing hours, I was meticulously digging through the county records like I was hunting for IEDs in Afghanistan. And just like in a war zone, the devil was in the excruciating details. I unearthed Grandpa Joe's original 1978 dam construction permits, and they were absolutely beautiful. You see, Grandpa Joe didn't just build that dam himself. He worked directly with the Army Corps of Engineers for crucial flood control and watershed management. That meant federal jurisdiction. And here's your first crucial knowledge nugget. Any dam built with federal guidance automatically creates federal jurisdiction that local HOAs simply cannot override. Period. The metallic taste of adrenaline hit my tongue as the profound realization of what I'd found sank in. This wasn't just a simple property dispute anymore. It was a federal case. But wait, it gets even better. While I was tirelessly photocopying permits at the courthouse, I stumbled across an even older, incredibly powerful document, a 1923 water rights deed, buried deep within the dusty old records. My great-grandfather had purchased senior water rights to the entire Willow Creek watershed. These rights were older than the city itself, older than the county's municipal water system, older than every single one of those ostentatious McMansions now sitting on my land. They weren't just stealing my property, they were brazenly stealing my water. Meanwhile, Maggie was busy playing the ultimate victim. She swiftly organized an emergency HOA meeting about the dangerous dam structure, complete with a local news crew she had obviously tipped off in advance. I watched her on the evening news, standing dramatically in front of her perfectly manicured lawn, feigning concern about children's safety and neighborhood security. "We're just so concerned about our children's safety," she whimpered, dabbing at her eyes with a delicate tissue. "That dam looks ready to burst, and we have families living right downstream." The funny thing about local news is they absolutely adore a good story, but they're not always stellar with follow-up research. If they'd bothered to check, they would have easily found that my dam had passed its most recent safety inspection with flying colors. But Maggie wasn't done with her theatrics. She took to the Nextdoor app, that digital neighborhood watch, where HOA presidents go to shamelessly flex their petty authority. Her post warned about aggressive property disputes and unstable individuals in the area. She never explicitly mentioned my name, but she didn't have to. In a community that small, everyone knew exactly who she was talking about. The heavy smell of diesel exhaust mixed with cedar pollen hung thick in the August air as I stood on my front porch each evening, helplessly watching their construction crews work double shifts. They were clearly racing to finish those houses before I could possibly get any kind of legal injunction. Every single night, I counted new foundation pours, and every single night, the water level in Grandpa Joe's dam dropped another agonizing inch. That's when I called my old Army buddy Mark Jensen, who now works for the EPA Enforcement Division. Just 20 minutes on the phone with Mark taught me more about environmental law than 3 hours with that exorbitantly expensive attorney. "Jake," Mark said, his voice firm, "if they're diverting a natural waterway without federal permits, that's a Clean Water Act violation. And if your dam has federal jurisdiction," he didn't even need to finish the sentence. I immediately started documenting everything: trail cameras strategically placed around the property perimeter, time-stamped photos of every water diversion, flow measurements taken at 3 different points along the creek. My sister Emily called from California, her voice strained, begging me to just take the money and walk away. But this wasn't about money anymore, was it? It was about the sickening crunch of gravel under construction boots that had absolutely no business being on my land. It was about the infuriating sound of Maggie's heels clicking across courthouse marble during zoning hearings that should never have happened. It was about the bitter taste of courthouse coffee during endless research sessions that revealed just how deep this corruption truly went. But most of all, it was about that dam. Grandpa Joe built it to help the community during dry spells. For 45 long years, it had been a vital source of life for our neighbors downstream. Maggie's crew was cruelly turning it into a decorative pond for their monstrous McMansions. Here's the thing about water rights in Texas: they're older than oil rights, older than mineral rights, and a hell of a lot harder to steal. But you absolutely have to know how to fight for them. As I stood there, watching yet another concrete truck rumble past my kitchen window, I had a crucial realization. This wasn't going to be won in a courtroom with expensive lawyers and dry legal briefs. This was going to be won with engineering. Maggie, of course, decided to turn up the heat. She organized what she brazenly called a neighborhood safety patrol. 3 HOA board members in matching polo shirts, who parked themselves at my property entrance like some kind of ridiculous suburban checkpoint. They photographed every visitor, meticulously wrote down license plates, and filed reports with the sheriff about suspicious activity. The harassment campaign was textbook intimidation, ludicrous loud music complaints. When I simply ran my radio during farm work, unsightly structures citations, for my perfectly functional farmhouse that had been standing proudly since 1962. Environmental hazards reports about my septic system that had passed inspection just 6 months earlier. But the real kick in the teeth came when Robert shamelessly used his city council position to order a wellness check on me through veteran services. Apparently, I was a troubled veteran who might be struggling with readjustment issues. The social worker who showed up was apologetic, but incredibly thorough. She had to check boxes on her clipboard, while Maggie watched, smirking from her golf cart, as if she were supervising a military inspection. That's when the coordinated bureaucratic assault truly began. A building inspector, a fire marshal, the health department, and animal control all showed up on the same day, like some kind of regulatory SWAT team. Each one miraculously found minor violations requiring expensive corrections. The building inspector, who just so happened to be a drinking buddy of Robert's, declared that my front porch needed $8,000 in foundation work. I recognized the squeeze play immediately. It's the very same tactic they use in war zones to pressure local officials, to overwhelm them with bureaucracy until they simply give up and cooperate. But two can play that game. While they were drowning me in endless paperwork, I was making some very important phone calls of my own.
Mark Jensen at the EPA was extremely interested to learn that Maggie's HOA had never filed the required wetlands assessment before illegally redirecting Willow Creek. It turns out that any development that redirects natural waterways requires federal environmental clearance, even on private property. And the fines for such egregious violations start at a staggering $50,000 per day. The distinct smell of fresh concrete curing in the summer heat reminded me every single morning that I was rapidly running out of time. But my relentless research was paying off in ways Maggie never ever expected. I discovered that their entire development had been built in what the Army Corps had precisely classified as a 100-year floodplain. Insurance companies had initially outright refused coverage until the HOA provided a flood mitigation plan. Their cunning solution: permanently divert Willow Creek away from the new homes and let it flood my property instead. Here's your second crucial knowledge nugget. Insurance fraud in development projects often carries criminal penalties, not just civil ones. When developers lie about flood risks to get coverage, that's federal mail fraud. The deeper I dug, the more I realized this wasn't Maggie's first rodeo. Her previous HOA in Houston had paid a whopping $2.3 million EPA fine for an identical creek diversion scheme. She'd conveniently left town just ahead of the federal prosecutors and set up shop here in Austin, brazenly looking for new victims. Meanwhile, Maggie was relentlessly spreading malicious rumors about my mental health and my supposed violent tendencies. She even hired a private investigator to dig up dirt on my military service and organized a petition demanding the city condemn my property as a public nuisance. "We have children playing in these neighborhoods," she dramatically told the local paper. "We can't have unstable individuals threatening our safety." But while she was busy playing the victim, I was quietly building powerful alliances. I connected with other HOA victims through online forums and quickly discovered a disturbing pattern. Maggie's HOA had absorbed 6 smaller properties through alarmingly similar tactics over the past 3 years. Each time, the story was eerily the same: relentless pressure, targeted harassment, bureaucratic warfare, and mysterious zoning changes that always seemed to conveniently benefit Robert's construction company. I partnered with my elderly neighbor, Mrs. Lee, whose vibrant family garden had tragically withered and died since the creek diversion. I met Mateo Rodriguez, whose family farm had been ruthlessly rezoned out of existence by Robert Thornton just 2 years earlier. These weren't isolated incidents. They were part of a systematic land grab that had been going on for years. The unsettling vibration of heavy machinery rumbling through my farmhouse floorboards became a daily, infuriating reminder of what I was truly fighting for. Every morning, I watched concrete trucks rumble past my kitchen window. Every evening, I painstakingly documented the water theft that was slowly but surely killing Grandpa Joe's dam. But I was also meticulously preparing. I installed water flow meters at the dam outlet and at the creek diversion points. I calculated the exact volume of water being stolen: 1,200 gallons per day, worth an astonishing $47,000 annually in agricultural water rights. The gritty texture of sand between my fingers as I tested the creek bed sediment told the story more eloquently than any lawyer ever could. This wasn't just theft, it was environmental destruction on a massive, horrifying scale. And then I received the certified letter. The city was planning to seize my property through eminent domain for public safety. The hearing was scheduled in just 2 short weeks. Maggie's quote in the paper made her ruthless strategy crystal clear. Sometimes you have to protect the community from itself. But as I stood at my bedroom window that night, watching storm clouds gather ominously on the horizon, I realized something incredibly important. Those weren't just rain clouds building up, they were opportunity. Maggie went nuclear. Robert fast-tracked an eminent domain hearing, scheduled for just 2 weeks out, and suddenly, the HOA was shamelessly offering me a paltry $180,000 for a property assessed at a staggering $890,000. The message was brutally clear: take the lowball offer or lose absolutely everything. The local newspaper ran a vicious hit piece that made me sound like some kind of domestic terrorist. Troubled veteran blocks community progress, screamed the headline, complete with a photo that somehow made my cherished farmhouse look like a crack den and me look like I hadn't slept in weeks. But Maggie's true master stroke was the photo op. She staged it absolutely perfectly. 20 concerned mothers, holding children near my property line, with a professional photographer meticulously capturing their worried faces, while my farmhouse loomed menacingly in the background. The Facebook post immediately went viral with the hashtag #ProtectOurKids. Our children deserve safe neighborhoods, she tearfully told the Channel 7 news crew, not whatever issues he brought back from war. You know what, she was right about one thing. I did bring something back from war. I brought back the honed ability to instantly recognize when someone's trying to steamroll you with propaganda, and crucially, the engineering skills to do something truly effective about it.
Mark Jensen called with information that utterly changed everything. The EPA had already opened a federal investigation into the Willow Creek diversions based on my initial complaint. But here's the kicker. Maggie's previous HOA in Houston faced that $2.3 million fine for the exact same scheme. Federal environmental crimes, it turns out, follow individuals even when they move to new jurisdictions. While Maggie was busy playing the victim on social media, I was uncovering that her entire financial house of cards was built on a foundation of pure fraud. The HOA's construction loans were inextricably tied to inflated property values, and the banks had explicitly required guaranteed water access for loan approval. If those water rights rightfully reverted back to me, their true owner, the entire development would become financially underwater. The bitter taste of irony was not lost on me. They'd stolen my water to make their land valuable, and now their own insatiable greed was going to drown them. Maggie's panic was truly starting to show. She desperately offered me $400,000 cash, no questions asked, with a 48-hour deadline. When I adamantly refused, she flew all the way to California to approach my sister Emily with some sob story about her brother's mental health issues. That backfired spectacularly. Emily might not know Texas land law, but she knows her brother. She called me, utterly roaring with laughter. Jake, some crazy woman in tennis clothes just offered to help with my troubled veteran brother. I told her if she contacts our family again, I'm calling the FBI. But while Maggie was busy making enemies, I was diligently making powerful allies. I partnered with environmental lawyer Sarah Jenkins, who specialized in pro bono water rights cases. Together, we formed a formidable coalition with downstream farmers who'd been severely affected by the creek diversion. Mateo Rodriguez brought invaluable historical documentation showing his family had used creek water for farming since 1887. Mrs. Lee provided heartbreaking photographs of her grandfather's garden from the 1940s, a garden once fed by the very same creek that was now cruelly feeding Maggie's decorative water features. The local Audubon Society was particularly interested to learn that the creek diversion had senselessly destroyed critical nesting habitat for several protected bird species. It turns out that killing protected wildlife while simultaneously committing water theft tends to get federal attention really fast. During my nighttime reconnaissance, old habits from the Army die hard, I discovered something truly beautiful. Grandpa Joe's dam wasn't just a simple earthwork structure. The original 1978 design included an emergency spillway system with powerful hydraulic gates that hadn't been opened since 1982. The hollow echo of water flowing through those underground spillway channels during my midnight tests told me everything I needed to know. The mechanism was still perfectly functional, and it was designed for exactly this kind of situation. Controlled flooding to restore natural water flow patterns. I meticulously calculated the exact water volume needed to restore Willow Creek to its original, rightful path, 2.8 million gallons. The dam was currently holding 3.1 million gallons thanks to recent rainfall. The math was absolutely perfect, but the timing had to be exquisitely precise. Using my drone for aerial reconnaissance, I mapped the exact locations of those new home foundations relative to the original creek bed. 5 houses were built directly in the historical flood channel. 3 more had basements perilously below the seasonal high water mark. And here's the truly beautiful part. The construction crews had installed decorative creek beds using concrete and pretty decorative stones. They looked nice, but they were never designed to handle actual natural water flow. Meanwhile, my spillway system was engineered by the Army Corps specifically for robust flood management. Then Maggie made her biggest, most fatal mistake. Her crew began installing permanent concrete barriers to completely block the original creek bed. This would not only render my spillway system utterly useless, but also permanently destroy the downstream ecosystem. But it also, ironically, gave me the perfect, undeniable justification for what I was about to do. The Weather Service was predicting heavy September rains, perfect seasonal cover for emergency dam maintenance. As I stood at those spillway controls at sunset, reading Grandpa Joe's poignant journal entry about helping neighbors during droughts, the decision crystallized with crystal clarity. It was time to open the gates. While digging through dusty courthouse records for the third time that week, I found a misfiled document that changed absolutely everything. Buried behind a stack of 1979 tax assessments was the original agricultural flood management covenant from Grandpa Joe's dam construction. The language was beautiful in its utter simplicity. Dam operators shall maintain natural seasonal flow patterns to preserve downstream agricultural water rights in perpetuity. This wasn't just permission to manage flooding. It was a legal obligation that superseded any HOA agreements or city ordinances. But Sarah Jenkins's relentless investigation uncovered something even more damaging. The HOA's insurance applications contained flat-out lies. They'd falsely claimed no seasonal flooding risk and permanent creek diversion approved by all agencies to secure an astounding $47 million in coverage. Here's your third crucial knowledge nugget. Insurance fraud in development projects often carries criminal penalties, not just civil ones. When you lie to insurance companies about environmental risks, that's federal mail fraud with mandatory prison time. The deeper we dug, the more the whole corrupt scheme unraveled. Robert Thornton's construction company wasn't just the contractor for the HOA development. He was the primary investor. Every single house built on my stolen land put money directly into his greedy pocket. And here's the kicker, he'd never once recused himself from a single city council vote that directly benefited his project. Mark Jensen shared EPA findings that made my blood absolutely boil. The creek diversion had senselessly killed the entire population of Guadalupe bass, a protected species that had thrived in Willow Creek for generations. Texas Parks and Wildlife had meticulously documented the fish kill, but somehow the report mysteriously got lost in Robert's office before it could trigger federal prosecution. They weren't just stealing land and water, they were destroying an entire precious ecosystem. But the real smoking gun came from Sarah Jenkins's banking contacts. The construction loans were secured by fraudulent environmental assessments that falsely claimed the creek diversion was merely a temporary construction measure. Banks were assured the water would be returned to its natural flow once construction was complete. If those water rights reverted to me, the entire development would violate federal lending regulations. The banks could demand immediate full repayment of $12 million in construction loans. That's when I found Grandpa Joe's handwritten journals in the farmhouse attic. His 1980 entry broke my heart. Open spillway today helped the Rodriguez farm and 3 others get through dry spell. That's what neighbors do. The dam was never about our family's profit. It was always about community service, about helping downstream neighbors survive droughts and meticulously managing floods to protect everyone in the watershed. Reading those journals, I finally realized what Maggie had truly stolen. It wasn't just land or water, it was 45 years of community cooperation that my grandfather had painstakingly built, one neighbor at a time. My engineering analysis confirmed what I'd long suspected. Maggie's creek diversion was actively creating an upstream flooding hazard. During heavy rains, the redirected water would inevitably back up into residential areas. The original creek bed had always provided natural flood control for the entire watershed, and my spillway system was the only way to safely and effectively manage seasonal flooding. The timeline pressure was absolutely crushing. September rains were predicted to be the heaviest in 7 years. If I waited for the legal system to slowly grind through appeals and federal investigations, natural flooding would happen anyway, potentially causing real, irreparable property damage. But if I acted now, I could precisely control the timing and intensity. A carefully controlled spillway release would gracefully demonstrate natural flood patterns without endangering anyone, while simultaneously proving that the HOA development blatantly violated federal environmental law. Standing at those spillway controls at sunset, holding Grandpa Joe's worn journal, the moral clarity hit me like a bolt of lightning. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about restoring the natural order that had sustained this community for generations. Maggie had systematically destroyed the local farming community. Mateo Rodriguez lost his family's century-old farm. Mrs. Lee's ancestral garden withered and died without creek water. 3 other families were cruelly forced to sell generational properties to Robert's eminent domain schemes. But the federal environmental investigators were conveniently scheduled to visit next month. Perfect timing. If I could demonstrate natural flood patterns before their inspection, it would undeniably prove the HOA development violated multiple federal laws. The musty smell of old hydraulic fluid and the dam control mechanisms reminded me that this equipment was built to last. Grandpa Joe had designed it for exactly this moment, when someone would need to bravely stand up for the creek and the community that depended on it. As storm clouds gathered ominously on the horizon, I made the decision that would change everything. It was time to honor Grandpa Joe's legacy and open those gates. But you don't just open a dam without a meticulous plan, do you? This wasn't revenge, it was a military operation, complete with legal cover, environmental justification, and unwavering community support. First, I assembled my dream team. Sarah Jenkins expertly coordinated the legal strategy, filing additional federal complaints to ensure maximum media attention when the spillway finally opened. Mark Jensen provided crucial federal cover, guaranteeing that EPA investigators would witness what he cleverly called our natural flooding demonstration. Mateo Rodriguez documented 40 years of devastating downstream agricultural damage, providing powerful historical testimony about seasonal flooding patterns that irrefutably proved the creek diversion was systematically destroying generational farming operations. Mrs. Lee generously offered her property as a staging area and brought invaluable credibility as the community's most respected longtime resident. Sarah Jenkins's legal strategy was nothing short of brilliant. She filed an emergency agricultural water rights restoration motion, eloquently arguing that the dam covenant legally required me to maintain seasonal flooding for downstream agriculture. We weren't breaking the law, we were proudly following it. Here's a crucial knowledge nugget. Agricultural water rights often supersede residential development rights, especially when you have ironclad historical documentation proving prior use. The key is having impeccable paperwork that predates any development claims. My technical preparation was pure Army Corps engineering excellence. I meticulously created detailed spillway operation plans with precise calculations, controlled release starting at 6 a.m., gradual increase over 4 hours, peak flow at 10 a.m. The water volume was precisely calculated to demonstrate natural flooding patterns, without causing structural damage to anything except Maggie's illegal concrete barriers. Safety was absolutely paramount. I posted warning signs 24 hours in advance and personally notified the volunteer fire department. This wasn't some reckless, uncontrolled flood. It was a carefully controlled demonstration of how water naturally wanted to flow. Sarah Jenkins contacted environmental reporters from the Austin American-Statesman and local TV stations. Mateo arranged for community members to witness the agricultural water restoration. The strategy was simple: control the narrative before Maggie could predictably spin it as dangerous veteran terrorizes neighborhood. Our intelligence network was straight out of a spy novel. Mrs. Lee diligently monitored HOA activity through the neighborhood gossip network. Never, ever underestimate little old ladies with time on their hands. The local diner waitress, who just so happened to be Mateo's cousin, reported on city council closed-door meetings. My army buddy at Fort Hood even provided surveillance drone support for legal documentation. While I was rebuilding spillway controls with modern hydraulic systems, Sarah Jenkins was simultaneously waging financial warfare. She contacted insurance companies with irrefutable evidence of fraudulent applications, arranged for banking regulators to review construction loan documentation, and prepared whistleblower complaints about Robert's blatant conflicts of interest. The beauty was in the exquisite timing coordination. The Weather Service confirmed heavy rains in 72 hours. Sarah Jenkins scheduled the federal environmental inspection for the very same week. Mateo arranged for the agricultural extension agent to document the downstream benefits. A perfect storm of natural weather, federal oversight, and overwhelming community support, all converging at exactly the right moment. But I knew Maggie's psychology. She always escalated when pressured. So I meticulously prepared for her predictable responses: an emergency HOA meeting, a vicious media smear campaign, probably a restraining order filed through her corrupt judge friend. Sarah Jenkins had already drafted preemptive legal responses to each expected attack. The evidence preservation was absolutely crucial. I compiled comprehensive photo documentation of the current creek diversion, recorded video testimony from affected farmers and neighbors, and gathered historical photographs showing the original creek bed and seasonal flooding patterns. Sarah Jenkins secured everything in federal court filings for ironclad legal protection. Safety protocols included meticulous coordination with the volunteer fire department, clear communication with downstream residents, and detailed notices posted in both English and Spanish. I even created an evacuation plan, which we wouldn't need, just to demonstrate responsible management. The economic warfare was Sarah Jenkins's specialty. She tipped off state banking regulators about construction loan irregularities, contacted the Texas Attorney General about the insurance fraud evidence, and prepared a civil RICO lawsuit alleging a pattern of racketeering. Here's another valuable knowledge nugget: coordinated regulatory pressure often forces settlement faster than individual lawsuits. When multiple agencies investigate simultaneously, defendants simply can't fight on all fronts. The distinct smell of WD-40 and machine oil filled the evening air as I meticulously serviced all the dam equipment and tested the spillway gates under minimal flow. Everything worked perfectly. Grandpa Joe had truly built this system to last. I stocked the farmhouse with supplies for a potential siege, knowing Maggie would try everything to stop me. Sarah Jenkins filed protective court orders preventing any interference with lawful dam operations. We established secure communications using military-grade encrypted radio. As I stood at those controls for the final equipment check, watching storm clouds build dramatically on the horizon, everything felt perfectly aligned. The weather forecast confirmed heavy rains in 48 hours. Federal investigators would arrive in 36 hours. Maggie was scheduled for her morning show appearance in 24 hours, probably planning another vicious attack on my character. The timing was absolutely perfect. Dawn tomorrow would bring justice, and 45 years of stolen water back to where it rightfully belonged. Maggie's desperation reached new terrifying levels when she hired private security to patrol my property perimeter. These weren't just rent-a-cops with flashlights. These were the same tactical gear wannabes who work private military contracts and somehow think HOA disputes are combat zones. My trail cameras caught them red-handed, trying to brazenly sabotage the spillway control mechanisms at 2 a.m. One absolute genius was caught on video attempting to jam concrete mix into the hydraulic lines while his buddy served as a lookout. Mark Jensen had wisely tipped off the sheriff's department, and Deputy Miller was patiently waiting in the shadows when they made their move. The arrest was truly beautiful to behold. Mr. Tactical Vest claimed they were protecting community infrastructure from an unstable individual, but it's pretty hard to explain why you're carrying a bag of quickset concrete at 2 a.m, isn't it? Maggie's media blitz was even more desperate. She appeared on the Austin Morning Show wearing her Sunday best and speaking in that trembling voice politicians use when they want to appear like victims. Veterans need mental health support, not weapons. She tearfully told the host, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. This man learned to use water as a weapon in Afghanistan, and now he's threatening to wash away children's homes. Robert himself provided expert testimony as a city engineer about catastrophic dam failure risks, conveniently forgetting to mention that my dam had passed every safety inspection for 45 years. But while Maggie was playing the victim on television, my surveillance training was paying huge dividends. I meticulously documented every sabotage attempt, every illegal entry, every single piece of evidence that would later prove a criminal conspiracy. Mark revealed that federal investigators had actually been wiretapping Robert's office phone as part of an ongoing corruption probe. These people were far more desperate than I'd ever realized. The legal assault came next. Robert fast-tracked an emergency restraining order hearing for 6 a.m. the following morning, clearly hoping to catch us off guard. Judge Thomas Riley, Robert's golf buddy, who'd conveniently received $15,000 in campaign contributions from Robert's construction company, agreed to hear the emergency public safety motion. Sarah Jenkins immediately discovered the corruption connection and filed for Judge Riley's recusal, but we knew the fix was in. If they couldn't stop the spillway opening legally, they'd stop it through a corrupt judge. Meanwhile, Maggie organized a neighborhood safety patrol to physically surround my property. 20 HOA residents showed up with folding chairs, coolers, and "Protect Our Kids" signs, planning to live stream the spillway opening as environmental terrorism. The optics were perfect for her twisted narrative. Suburban families with innocent children versus a dangerous veteran with a dam. But Mateo Rodriguez had been incredibly busy too. He brought 30 farmers and their families to support what we called agricultural water restoration. Mrs. Lee organized a powerful counter-demonstration with historical photos showing the creek in its natural, pristine state. Sarah Jenkins arranged for Audubon Society and Sierra Club representatives to attend. Two competing narratives were about to violently collide: veteran attacks families versus community protects water rights. The technical sabotage shockingly escalated when security footage revealed someone had poured concrete mix into the spillway channel overnight, creating a blockage designed to cause actual flooding danger if I opened the gates. This wasn't just harassment, it was attempted murder disguised as vandalism. I worked tirelessly through the night with a portable jackhammer, clearing the sabotage while meticulously documenting every chunk of concrete as irrefutable evidence. The metallic taste of exhaustion mixed with pure fury as I realized just how far they were truly willing to go. Robert then shamelessly used his city council emergency powers to declare my property an imminent public hazard, authorizing the fire department to secure the dangerous dam structure. Fire Chief Peterson, one of the few truly honest officials left in town, privately warned me that this was purely political. "Jake, you've got maybe 6 hours before they force me to intervene," he said, his voice grave. "Make it count." The insurance investigation breakthrough came at the perfect, most opportune moment. Sarah Jenkins's fraud reports had triggered a state investigation, and the Texas Insurance Commission froze all HOA development insurance policies. Without valid insurance, the construction company faced an immediate work stoppage. Financial pressure was finally hitting where it truly hurt: Maggie and Robert's wallets. Mark moved the EPA inspection up 24 hours due to credible sabotage reports. Federal agents were now en route, arriving at 8 a.m. If the spillway opened during their inspection, it would become federal evidence of proper water management. But Maggie's final gambit was the cruelest of all. She contacted Veterans Mental Health Services, baselessly claiming I'd made suicide threats and needed an involuntary psychiatric hold. The VA social worker arrived at my farmhouse at 5:30 a.m., just as I was preparing for the spillway operation. I had to convince her I was mentally competent while simultaneously preparing to flood a subdivision. Not exactly a normal Tuesday morning conversation, was it? Emily called from California, her voice breaking with raw emotion. I can't lose my brother too, she sobbed. Please, Jake, this isn't what Grandpa Joe would want. For a moment I almost cracked. Then I found Grandpa Joe's final journal entry about bravely standing up to bullies, and my resolve hardened like concrete. Sometimes you have to flood the valley to save the creek. At precisely 7:02 a.m., with federal agents intently watching and the morning sun painting the sky a vibrant orange, I opened the spillway gates to 25% capacity. The sound was absolutely magnificent. Not the violent rush of destruction, but the gentle whisper of water returning home. For the first time in 18 months, Willow Creek began gracefully flowing in its original natural bed, exactly where nature always intended. Mateo Rodriguez knelt beside the restored creek and cupped the clear water in his weathered hands, tears streaming down his face. This is the water that fed my grandfather's farm for 60 years, he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. Maggie's reaction was immediate and utterly predictable. She shrieked at the federal agents to arrest the terrorist, her carefully composed morning show demeanor cracking like cheap paint. EPA agent Olivia Chen calmly explained, "Ma'am, this gentleman has the legal right to operate his agricultural flood control system." But Maggie was live streaming on Facebook, her voice rising to near hysteria. "He's flooding our children's homes. This is what happens when we let unstable veterans have weapons." Except the water wasn't flooding anything. It was flowing exactly where it belonged, in the original creek bed that her development had illegally blocked. Local news helicopters circled overhead, broadcasting the spillway operation live. The Austin American-Statesman reporter was interviewing downstream farmers about their miraculously restored water access, when Maggie tried to brazenly hijack the interview. "This veteran is using military training to attack civilians," she shrieked. The reporter, clearly bewildered, asked, "Ma'am, the water is flowing in the original creek bed. How exactly is this an attack?" You could almost hear Maggie's entire narrative collapsing in real time. Robert was frantically calling Judge Riley, screaming into his phone about property values and campaign contributions. "That psycho is destroying millions in property value," he yelled, apparently forgetting that Sarah Jenkins was recording the entire conversation from the courthouse steps. "Here's a legal nugget for you. Texas is a one-party consent state, which means you only need one person's permission to record a phone conversation, and that person can be yourself." The engineering validation was absolutely beautiful. EPA agent Olivia Chen meticulously measured the water flow and confirmed it matched historical seasonal patterns exactly. Mark Jensen documented everything. "This is how the creek flowed naturally before the 2022 diversion," he declared. "Federal agencies prioritize natural water flow over development convenience, and we were proving that crucial principle in real time." Mrs. Lee's garden irrigation system filled for the first time in 18 months. 3 downstream farms reported restored water access to their stock ponds. The local diner owner brought steaming coffee and homemade kolaches to everyone, saying, "My daddy farmed here. This is how it should be." Even some of Maggie's own supporters began quietly leaving as they realized no homes were actually being flooded. It turns out it's incredibly hard to maintain righteous indignation when the disaster you're protesting is just water flowing where water naturally flows. The insurance collapse accelerated when the construction company received a cease and desist order from state investigators. All work immediately stopped on the HOA development pending the fraud investigation. Maggie then discovered her own homeowner's insurance might be voided due to fraudulent water access claims. The financial house of cards was collapsing faster than a dam made of playing cards. But Maggie wasn't done fighting, not yet. She called Robert in a panic. "Get your trucks down here and block that spillway." Robert, apparently having learned absolutely nothing from the arrest of his security team, sent 3 concrete trucks to accidentally spill their loads across the creek bed. Federal agents immediately arrested the truck drivers for interfering with a federal environmental investigation. It turns out interfering with federal environmental enforcement is a felony, not just a civil matter. The technical success was everything I'd calculated. Water flow stabilized at optimal levels for agricultural and environmental needs. Absolutely no flooding of residential areas. The creek stayed perfectly within its natural banks, exactly as 45 years of seasonal patterns had proven it would. My Army Corps engineering had been flawless. The political fallout was swift. City Councilman Peterson arrived and publicly demanded Robert's immediate resignation. "This corruption has made our city a laughingstock," he announced to the gathered media. "You're done." Federal investigators expanded their probe to include RICO charges for systematic land fraud. Mark told me later, "This is the smoking gun we needed for criminal prosecution." But the sweetest moment came when Maggie finally realized her $2.3 million investment was now utterly worthless without fraudulent water access. She shrieked at me across the creek, "You've destroyed everything. 35 families." My response was calm, measured, and loud enough for every camera to catch. "No, ma'am, I restored everything. Your families can buy water rights legally, just like everyone else has to." Maggie stormed off, threatening federal lawsuits that would of course never materialize. As Mateo's extended family arrived with homemade tamales and cold beer, and Mrs. Lee brought a traditional Chinese tea ceremony to bless the restored creek, I realized something profoundly important. This was never about revenge, it was about community. The kind Grandpa Joe had built, one neighbor at a time, one drought at a time, one selfless act of generosity at a time. The media narrative had shifted completely. Environmental groups hailed the spillway operation as a model for ecosystem restoration. The original Veteran Floods neighborhood story became community reclaimed stolen water. Sometimes the truth flows as naturally as water finding its way home. Judge Riley's courtroom at 2 p.m. was packed tighter than a can of sardines. Media crews, farmers, HOA residents, and federal agents filled every seat, with overflow crowds watching through the windows. You could feel the electricity in the air. This wasn't just a legal hearing, it was a community reckoning. Maggie arrived with a three-piece suit army, high-powered Houston attorneys, expert witnesses, and enough legal firepower to take down a small government. She traded her tennis outfit for a conservative black dress and pearls, flawlessly playing the role of a concerned community leader defending innocent families. I showed up with Sarah Jenkins, wearing a simple button-down shirt and Grandpa Joe's old cowboy hat. Sometimes the best armor is just being comfortable in your own skin. The gallery was divided like a wedding gone horribly wrong. HOA supporters on the left, clutching their "Protect Our Kids" signs, facing the farming community on the right, with their weathered hands and determined faces. Maggie's attorney opened with dramatic flair, presenting photos of muddy construction sites and ludicrously claiming $2.7 million in flood damage from my spillway operation. They even wheeled in a psychiatrist who had never once met me, but was happy to diagnose combat revenge fantasies based solely on newspaper clippings. "Your Honor," the attorney declared, gesturing toward me like I was a war criminal, "this disturbed veteran is using military engineering knowledge to terrorize innocent families. He's turned water into a weapon of mass destruction." The courtroom buzzed with whispers until Sarah Jenkins stood for our response. She calmly presented the 1978 Agricultural Flood Management Covenant that legally required seasonal flooding. EPA agent Olivia Chen then took the stand and unequivocally testified that my spillway operation had restored natural water flow patterns without causing any actual property damage. Historical photographs proved current water levels matched 60 years of natural seasonal patterns. Here's your final crucial knowledge nugget. Legal water rights documentation always trumps recent development claims, especially when you have federal environmental agencies backing your position. Then Mark Jensen took the stand as an EPA enforcement officer. His testimony was absolutely devastating. The HOA development had violated 3 separate federal environmental laws, committed systematic insurance fraud, and senselessly destroyed protected wildlife habitat. Judge Riley squirmed uncomfortably in his seat, as federal crimes were meticulously detailed in his own courtroom. You could visibly see him calculating whether his political loyalty to Robert was worth potential federal prosecution for obstruction of justice. The breaking point came when Sarah Jenkins bravely called Robert as a witness. Under oath, he brazenly admitted to fast-tracking zoning changes while I was deployed overseas, and foolishly revealed his financial stake in the construction company. When Sarah Jenkins played the recorded phone conversation about destroying property values, Robert absolutely exploded. "This is a federal setup," he screamed, storming toward the exit. "We did nothing wrong." His own words, captured on audio, proved the conspiracy better than any prosecutor ever could. But the real emotional power came from the community testimony. Mateo Rodriguez described 3 generations of farming destroyed by the creek diversion, his voice breaking as he talked about his grandfather's dreams dying with the stolen water. Mrs. Lee showed poignant photographs of her family garden, lush and green before the diversion, brown and withered after. Her quiet dignity spoke louder than any legal argument. Fire Chief Peterson testified that the spillway operation was professionally executed with 0 safety violations. Downstream property owners confirmed their agricultural water access had been fully restored. Then Maggie took the stand for what became her final pathetic performance. "He came back from war damaged, Your Honor," she whined, pointing at me with trembling fingers. "He's taking revenge on innocent families. using psychological warfare against children. She claimed I'd threatened her safety and described the spillway operation as environmental terrorism designed to destroy property values and traumatize residents. When Sarah Jenkins called me to testify, the courtroom went utterly silent. I presented Grandpa Joe's journals, documenting 40 years of community water sharing, explained my Army Corps engineering calculations, and spoke directly to Judge Riley. Your Honor, I didn't flood anybody. I restored a creek that was stolen from my family in this community for 45 years. The mic drop moment came when Sarah Jenkins presented the final damning evidence. Documentation of Maggie's Houston HOA paying $2.3 million in EPA fines for an identical creek diversion scheme. The federal prosecutor stood and dramatically announced a criminal investigation into interstate water fraud conspiracy. The courtroom erupted as the true scope of the corruption became sickeningly clear. Judge Riley had no choice. He denied all restraining order requests, ruled that my spillway operation was legal and beneficial, and ordered the HOA to cease all interference with federal environmental investigations. His warning to Robert was pointed and chilling. This court will not obstruct lawful federal environmental enforcement. As federal agents escorted Robert from the courthouse while banking investigators served additional warrants, Maggie found herself surrounded by reporters with absolutely nowhere to hide. She refused all comment and sped away in her BMW, probably already calling moving companies. I emerged to cheering crowds of farmers, environmentalists, and curious townspeople who'd witnessed justice flowing as naturally as water finding its way home. Sarah Jenkins announced the federal RICO investigation at an impromptu press conference, while Mateo thanked me on behalf of every affected family. My statement was simple. This was never about revenge. It was about doing right by the land and the people who depend on it. 6 months later, justice flowed as naturally as the restored creek. Robert Thornton pleaded guilty to federal conspiracy charges and received 3 years in federal prison. Maggie faced $8.7 million in civil penalties and filed for bankruptcy faster than water rushing through an open spillway. The construction company paid $12 million in EPA fines and was permanently banned from all federal contract work. The HOA dissolved completely, and residents formed a new community association focused on environmental stewardship instead of suburban tyranny. My property value was restored to $1.2 million after the federal environmental designation made it more valuable than any suburban development ever could. The $340,000 settlement from the insurance fraud investigation went to a truly good cause. I bought Mateo's family farm at tax auction and returned it to him completely debt-free. Environmental restoration often increases property values far more than development ever could. The community transformation was the real profound victory. The restored creek now attracts ecotourism, kayaking, birdwatching, and fishing where those ugly McMansions were supposed to stand. Mrs. Lee's garden became a vibrant demonstration site for sustainable agriculture, and 3 downstream farms reported their best crop yields in a decade. The local diner became the unofficial headquarters for the Willow Creek Restoration Association, where farmers and environmentalists planned the next fight against corporate water theft. The environmental success exceeded every expectation. Protected Guadalupe bass populations recovered to pre-diversion levels within 4 months. The Audubon Society documented 12 bird species returning to restored wetland habitat. Texas Parks and Wildlife designated the creek as a critical wildlife corridor, ensuring its permanent protection. My spillway operation became a case study in the Army Corps of Engineers training manual. Sometimes the best revenge is simply doing your job correctly. Personally, I found a piece I didn't even know I was missing. I lovingly renovated Grandpa Joe's farmhouse using sustainable construction techniques, and Emily moved back from California to help manage our growing agritourism business. Sarah Jenkins and I? Well, let's just say fighting environmental crime together creates a pretty strong bond, doesn't it? The ripple effects spread across Texas like water finding new channels. Environmental groups now use the Willow Creek model to challenge illegal diversions statewide. Federal agencies cite our case in new water rights enforcement guidelines. I've become an unofficial consultant for communities fighting HOA overreach, and my phone rings constantly. We established the Grandpa Joe Miller Environmental Scholarship for rural students studying water management. Mateo's daughter Maria was the very first recipient, and she's now studying environmental engineering at UT Austin. She passionately wants to protect watersheds across Texas from people like Maggie. The annual Creek Days Festival celebrates restoration and community resilience with local food, environmental education, and veteran support services. We've raised money for a water rights legal defense fund that's already helped 6 other communities fight back against corporate theft. My favorite part? Kids swimming freely in the creek where homes were supposed to be built, splashing in water that flows free because a community bravely stood together. Every Sunday I visit Grandpa Joe's grave and bring creek water in a mason jar, just like he used to do when he checked the flow after heavy rains. Thanks, Grandpa Joe, I tell him. The creek's singing again just like you said it would. The Legacy Project ensures this victory lasts forever. The Willow Creek Conservation Trust now proudly owns development rights to the entire watershed, creating a permanent buffer zone that absolutely prevents future commercial development. No one will ever steal this water again. But here's the beautiful twist. Maggie's Houston HOA faced federal RICO prosecution based on our case. 147 families across 3 states filed similar water rights restoration lawsuits. What started as one veteran's fight became a powerful movement for environmental justice nationwide. From my porch each evening, watching that creek flow exactly where it belongs, I'm reminded that some fights are worth absolutely everything you've got. Sometimes you have to flood the valley to save the creek. But you don't do it alone. You do it with your community, your neighbors, and people who truly believe clean water belongs to everyone, not just whoever has the best lawyers and the most corrupt city council connections. If you're fighting HOA overreach, environmental destruction, or bureaucratic bullying, please don't give up. Document everything, find allies, and always remember, the law is on your side when you're protecting the land for future generations. Drop a comment and tell me your HOA nightmare story. I read every single one and reply when I can, because these fights are easier when we support each other. Hit subscribe if you want more stories about communities fighting back against corruption and winning, and remember, your voice matters, your vote matters, and your creek matters too. Next week I'm telling you about the city that tried to steal my neighbor's solar farm, so she cut power to City Hall during the mayor's wedding reception. That's a story about a different kind of power, and how one engineer turned the lights out on municipal corruption. Water finds a way, justice finds a way, and communities that fight together, win together. Willow Creek flows free, y'all, and it always will.